welcome to the CNBC Africa Debate on developing skills for tomorrow's economy. We're coming to you live from Kigali in Rwanda, where the World Economic Forum on Africa is currently in session. I'm joined to my immediate right by Jay Ireland, the Chief Executive of GE Africa. To his right, Brian Dames, who to his right is Brian Dames, the CEO of African Rainbow Energy and Power, and Siyabonga Gama is the CEO of Transnet. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.
Great to be here.
Developing skills has to be key to Africa's survival. And Jay, I'm going to open to you on this. Are we paying enough attention to human capital and how important it is to sustaining the Africa story?
I would say internally, meaning internally in Africa, probably yes. We talk about it. Whether we're doing enough about it is a different discussion. But I think when you go externally, everywhere I go outside the region, you hear about power, healthcare, security, all the other stuff. I think, to your point, the skills building is absolutely critical, and we need to do more about it from the standpoint of a combination of government, private sector, to really drive, because it's going to have to be both to really drive the capabilities of the region.
Take that discussion further. It's one thing to deploy the infrastructure, be it, let's say, in the power space, but the maintenance of that infrastructure takes key skills. And again, it comes back to sustainability. Brian?
No, you're very right. I mean, these are an asset that has to serve the continent for decades. And I think if we take one step back, without the infrastructure, Africa is certainly not going to reach its full potential. To achieve that, you need this fundamental issue around skills and education address. And I think there's a lot of priority on that. And I think if you look at government spending, typically in South Africa, it is the largest spend goes towards education. The issue then is now, why aren't we getting the outcomes that we're looking for as business? And I think therein lies the fact that I think for decades, we kind of like spend money on the same systems. And we need to really turn the education system, whether it's early childhood development or primary school or tertiary education, turn that around and start focusing on what the continent needs going forward. And those needs is going to be different to the education system we've had for the last decades that we've inherited and that we now continue to invest. Now, in addition to that, we also need the right educators to be able to drive those new skills and competencies that one needs. And I think the one aspect that we will have to focus on as a continent is the aspect of vocational training, creating artisans, people that have, not all of us can go to university, not all of us are going to become doctors and scientists, which are crucially important. But a big part of us needs to be able to construct and build this infrastructure. And that also addresses the maintenance needs going forward.
So we have the money, because that's what you were saying. Yep. Education budgets are enormous.
Not everywhere in Africa.
No, all right, I stand corrected. Not everywhere in Africa, but there's definitely a show of faith in terms of money being allocated to education by governments. Then we have the talk. Jay, as you said, there's a lot of talk around education. How can we make this translate into action? Because it's not something that we've got years and years to finesse the scenario. If we do not develop skills on the African continent, we cannot participate in the knowledge economy or the global economy, so to speak.
Yeah, no, you're quite correct. I think, for us at Transnet, we've set aside 9.2 billion rand for training and skills development and capacity building for the 7-year period of our MDS. So we are already trying to translate that into action. Transnet has got a number of schools, a Maritime School of Excellence. We have a School of Rail, we've got a School of Engineering, School of Pipelines. So we train about 3,000 people per year, which includes artisans. But our own needs is only really about 1,000. So after we've trained the people, we also then are saying that the economy can then benefit, or the rest of society can then benefit from some of these skills, because the schooling system does not really harness the kinds of skills that we require at work. You need to try and bolster some of the skills so that they are much more practical. And I think, as Brian was saying, vocational training is actually quite important for us for infrastructure development, for the kind of mechanical engineering projects that we are currently trying to do. But also what we found in recent years is, for instance, the diesel mechanic, who is a very, very important person.
This is the diesel mechanic?
Yeah. There's very, very few young people who want to become diesel mechanics. And yet there is lots of scope, there's lots of jobs that can be filled in the diesel space. I think, Jay builds lots of diesel locomotives, I'm sure. You probably experienced the same thing. And we are now trying very hard to, because everybody thinks, because there's now a digital space, you're going to do computer-based training about everything. There's certain things where you need your hands in order to be able to make that work. So
we need to rebrand diesel mechanics.
Yes.
And
well, I would say it's more the technical training, and it's a combination of artisanal, and then working its way up to engineers.
Yeah.
And all of that is really lacking in Africa. And I don't know why. We really don't have issues hiring finance, marketing, those types of people out of universities. Plenty of graduates, plenty of well-qualified graduates. We have a real problem on the technical side, and it's not a quality issue as much as it's a quantity issue. And and I agree wholeheartedly with both C and Brian on that. I think it's going to be, and it's a global issue as well. It's not just Africa.
It's a global issue, and Africa, herein lies opportunity for the continent, even as far as skills is concerned. Because yes, we're going to have the youngest population globally. Everybody, we can absolutely be the world's factory. There's no reason why we can't. We just have to revolutionize what we're busy doing and the investment that we. And so the programs with the likes of Transnet or even Eskom, that is how, to a great extent, countries has been able to industrialize. The same happened in the United States when they started with the major infrastructure programs. And so it's crucially important that they develop skills, not just for themselves, but there's also a different skill set as each one of our industries changes. I mean, if you think about electricity, it has to be more than just power stations, transmission lines. It has to be, how do you get the customer closer to the power? How do you give customer greater choice, greater digitization of networks and infrastructure? And that are new sets that needs to be built together with some very deep skills you need, whether you run a coal facility or even a nuclear facility in Africa.
So
those
you
are
can't
deep skills.
Stagnate in the
You
skills
can't
and development.
stagnate.
You've
You
got to
have
keep
to.
abreast with the global economy.
But we have a huge opportunity, and we just have to take our funds and put energy behind it.
And then also, I think what we need to do, Africa is at the cusp of many industrial revolutions. Certain aspects of Africa are still on the second industrial revolution, trying to get electricity and power going. Some are beginning to go into the digital stage and looking at the Internet of Things and things like that. And some are getting into the fourth industrial revolution. So what you probably need is it's a cacophony of different skills in different countries. But where you've got 70% of our youth on the continent being under the age of 30, it means we have a lot of opportunity to diversify the skills base so that we are in each country and in each region we can begin to say what is the biggest area of need and focus and concentrate on those kinds of skills so that we can then try to reindustrialize Africa at a much faster pace as well.
We've obviously got 3 converts in studio today. Does your peer group echo your sentiments? And are they putting money behind skills and development? I'm talking about the private sector.
Yeah, I think so. I think the question is figuring out how to do it in the most effective way. For us at GE, we spend about $1 billion a year around training for our employees. That's just internal, and then we also do a number of programs with customers, suppliers, et cetera. So, we've done it. Most every other company we know does it. If bigger companies, where the issue is a combination. We're always going to get university grads in engineering, and we're going to have to take them from theoretical to practical. That's our responsibility. Yeah. And I'm sure that every one of us does that. So we get that. But we need, when they graduate from university, to have certain basic skills. And they need those basic skills when they graduate from secondary schools before university. And that's a little bit where, depending on government, if it's a public university or so I think those are the dynamics. So, but it's a broad range, and I think it's a question of ensuring that there's enough quantity of people coming through the system. But I think everyone sees it, and the issue, it's not just our employees, but as Brian said, it's the power. We can put all the power generation in we want, but if we don't have anybody who knows how to run it, what's the point? We do that in hospitals. We have, we could sell a lot more equipment, but there's no nurses, there's no doctors, radiologists.
The human capital is needed.
It's huge. It's a big deal. And there is a lot of human capital, African human capital, that is not in Africa.
The diaspora.
Yes. Yeah.
How do we get the diaspora back? You hit on a very important point.
Right.
What are you doing to get the diaspora back?
I mean, there are many examples. I mean, I think the place that we're in now it's a very good example of a government that is very clear as to what they want to do, put technology very high up on the list, and that creates a totally different environment. That people say, this is a place that I want to work, because you do more in Africa. You actually do more than just your job. You have a fundamental development role, whether you focus on infrastructure, education, and that makes a huge difference to communities and societies that you can change. And I think that increasingly projected across the continent will attract people back. But just to come back on your point on business, I think business certainly has bought into that. I think in South Africa you've seen a very close partnership between business and government as to how you deal with all aspects of education, including funding it. And sometimes we fall over each other in terms of funding. Every CSI program focuses on education, and sometimes useful to funnel those funds and focus on what we want to achieve in terms of outcomes and what the economy needs. So it's very important to have clear leadership. What are we going to focus on in the economy? What type of skills we need?
You wanted to make a comment on diaspora and attracting the talent back to Africa?
I think it's a combination of a bunch of things. There's people want to come back when they see that they can come here and succeed in a number of different ways, whether they're building their own businesses or joining big companies or joining companies. When I look at the healthcare space, I look at the amount of African doctors and nurses in the UK, in the United States. I mean, it's especially when they're coming out of countries like Ghana and Nigeria, where there's a tremendous need. It's big, but they've got to feel that there's a place here that they can use their skills and have a decent lifestyle and things like that. So there's a lot of aspects to that, and we're trying to give them opportunities in that case to come back with programs wrapped around diagnostic imaging centers, things like that. So that's one way to do it. And then obviously with a company like ours, we've had quite a number of people within GE. We have our own diaspora that are in the United States and Europe and elsewhere. So we focus on it quite a bit.
Sia, can I get you to weigh in on this issue?
Yep, I think the critical thing is probably a political economy issue as well. A lot of the people would like to come back to countries that are stable. They want, the essence of success for them is, being able to say, this is a place, an environment where, my children could prosper. So things like democracy, stable political economy become quite critical for us to be able to attract some of those skills, because as you know, when we talk about the mobility of labor, some of the top-end skills that we require, they can go anywhere in the world. So we need to find ways to attract those skills back to assist us in terms of being able to then take us to the next trajectory. And I think multinational corporations are also in a very good space in terms of recycling some of the skills and moving them around and assisting, to make sure that the talent levels actually go up in a real sense. Yeah.
It's interesting in the diaspora. I was in a panel recently around technology, digital revolution, the whole thing, and the question came up, when is the first Africa unicorn? The company that gets $1 billion of capitalization from a startup. And then, what about big African technical, success? I said, well, one of them is Elon Musk. He's an African. He's doing it in the United States. If there was the capital, the venture capital community, all the other things that make the West Coast of the United States that attractive to people like him in their technical ideas, So there are Africans that are out there succeeding very well in the technical digital space, but not here necessarily.
So that's a great example to take us to a break. We're coming back, and we're going to continue to have this robust debate about developing skills for tomorrow's economy. In studio, Jay Island, Brian Dames, and Siyabonga Gama. Stay with us. We'll be back after this short break. Welcome back to this debate on developing skills for tomorrow's economy, coming to you live from Kigali, Rwanda, where the World Economic Forum on Africa is currently in session. In studio, we are lucky enough to have Jay Island, Brian Dames, and Siyabonga Gama. We are talking skills development. I'm very excited about regional pools of infrastructure, regional pools of training facilities. And I talk now about the North-South corridor. We talk about the Central corridor. Is there merit in having these regional training academies? What are your thoughts?
I just want to close out on the diaspora thing, and it's part of how do we revolutionize and kind of like move forward a lot quicker. If you have somebody coming back and work for Jay, I think it's absolutely great. But if you have that person coming back and start sharing skills and start educating, it has a massive impact. And I think on the continent we really need scale in everything that we do. We all do a whole bunch of stuff, including in education. And so your point around regional integration is therefore also crucially important. I think scale is important for the continent.
And it's one way of achieving scale.
Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes if we should dream big, but we should also look at what is doable. So I would have a strong sub-regional focus around the issues of skill or infrastructure. I would certainly support. If you take electricity as an example, the only way Africa is going to deal with this if it starts, putting regional frameworks together for power generation, for regulation, for customers. But to do that, we have to address some fundamentals, and that is the ease of mobility across borders. And if you do that regional thing, you need to kind of like think about it as a regional free trade zone of both infrastructure, skills.
Which is starting to happen in the East
African
community.
Which is starting to happen, but that needs to be progressed a lot faster.
I think that's very important. And I think it's a key thing from a standpoint when you look at what we will do. So we're setting up a training academy in Kenya for biomed techs, radiologists, et cetera. And it's not just for Kenya. We can do that for all of East Africa. So we can bring Rwandans, Ugandans, et cetera, come in, Tanzanians, to come in and then train there, and then without a visa issue and all of the other things. And I think that's a key thing. And when you say north-south and all that, I agree with Brian. Let's make it doable, sub-region that makes sense, and have that ability. But we do this internally where we hire a lot of young people in our own internal training programs, and then we move them around. So we have Kenyans in South Africa, Nigerians in Kenya, all over. Yet when we have them in those countries, they're counted against an expat quota. And we get no credit for the South African that's working in Kenya.
The transfer of skills that you are deploying country to country.
We have these South African guys, these kids, and they're working in Kenya, Nigeria, some in the United States, and they're going to transfer back. But we don't get any credit for any of that. And so it's fine, we get it, but I think it's a way to think about the ability to, and when you look at universities and all, and I think the movement is a key thing. In East Africa here, they've done a great job of that so
Mobility, key to regional training pools?
Yeah, I think mobility is key, and also the regional programs that are taking place. I mean, if I make an example of maritime schools, in Alexandria in Egypt. There is one in Mombasa, Kenya, and then we have the schools in South Africa. You don't have to have a proliferation of all of these in each and every country. But if there could be a vision, a Pan-African vision that says what skills will be leveraged where, so that you can then be able to move the people around. Because if you look at things like the ISPS code or the World Maritime Organization and ILO, we are beginning to move towards a world where there are very similar standards that are being adopted on a global scale. We just then need to make sure that whatever skills that we try and attain, they must be relevant for the region in which they're at. And we must make sure that as we integrate the entire Africa, because I think Africa needs to have its own globalization as a continent, because we still have a lot of these missing links. There's a lot of things from an infrastructure perspective which prevent the appropriate mobility, which would assist us to liberate much more trade, so that we trade a little bit more with each other. And I think developing those kinds of skills that will assist with that, whether it be around customs clearances, for instance, is a critical issue that we need to look at in terms of trade facilitation as well.
Brian, you made the point earlier on in the discussion that we need to get the basics right in terms of primary education. I'm going to add to that by saying STEM skills, science, technology, engineering, and math. So moving a little now off the internships and the vocational training, but are we paying enough attention? Having come out of environments like the World Economic Forum in China, there is such a focus on STEM skills and what that is doing for the economy to leapfrog.
Yeah, no, and I think it is absolutely crucial for Africa in terms of innovation of an African kind. And I think that is crucially important. And it has to start quite young and early, and giving kids a very solid base around maths and science. So I come back to the issues of the educators. And I think we need to put those people on a pedestal. And sometimes we don't see them as the elite in society. And we see the businessman as such. And we need to change that in terms of the value that they add to a country's education system. Myself as a scientist, I was trained as a nuclear scientist for many, many years. And you have a deep understanding of what you're doing before you start branching out into management and doing some other very creative things that you could do. And that is very important. So I've been fortunate. My daughter took it further in terms of being a scientist and has got this absolute passion. Now, we need to build that in generations. Now, we've unfortunately on the continent have lost some generations. So what does a fourth industrial revolution offer us? It has to offer us technology to try and close some of those generational gaps and create this excitement. The first time I saw, as a scientist, a computer was doing it with punch cards. The first time I saw a PC was when I started working as a nuclear physicist using an old IBM. I think it was a Commodore just before then. These days, the first time my kid sees a PC, it's an iPad. And so we have to use that in order to make sure we ingrain that love for science and maths at an early stage. But our educators need to really drive that passion as well.
Yeah, just, following upon that, I saw something recently, an educator in South Africa who was being celebrated because of the amount of actuaries, engineers, and CAs coming from a very disadvantaged background. But this school teacher was a math teacher and has actually done so much in terms of producing distinctions. And I think if we could begin to celebrate those people who assist us to churn out the kind of talent. You're looking at committed educators, but also as the syllabi changes, people must also upgrade themselves so that they become relevant for the times that we're in, because it's no use having an old syllabus when the world is changing in front of your eyes and people are not upgrading themselves. So further education for the educators as well is quite important to make sure that we remain relevant. But I think we need to look at what kind of interventions can actually reimagine and drive the imagination of educators in a manner and way in which all of them could be motivated to do much more.
Closing comments. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah.
So Jay, we're going to start with you. I want to go back to the topic at hand, developing skills for tomorrow's economy. Closing comments from each of you, starting with Jay Island.
Absolutely critical. Without that, the rest of the economic growth will grind to a halt. It's a combination of physical, whether it's infrastructure, technical, et cetera, technology, et cetera, but it's also got to be skills development as well. And it's a combination of private sector, government, NGOs, whatever, but we've got to work together, make it accountable, and make it outcome-based.
I'm excited. We have this huge demographic dividend we all talked about. I think everybody's aligned as to the priority, the issues about implementation and getting it done. And I think everybody agreed that no more can governments deliver on all of this. All they can do is provide a framework. And so you need this strong government, business, NGO type of coordination. And given the technology available, you know, we're going to see more Elon Musk coming out of Africa, staying in Africa, and growing those businesses in Africa to address our needs.
Certainly, I think the vision is there, and there's very good policies. I think where we always remain lacking is really around implementation. How do we take all of these things into small and concrete action plans that get implemented, and somebody is always looking at the outcomes and making sure that all of the things that we said we'll do are being done? Because certainly the funding and the financing is there, and I think there's a lot of commitment that we have from all around. I think what is important now is to make sure that we start to measure results in terms of outcomes, making sure that wherever there are shortages and there are gaps, that we're closing those gaps, because it is people that are going to catapult us to move from being emerging economies to developed economies.
Great point to leave it on. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for this debate on developing skills for tomorrow's economy. We've been coming to you live from Kigali, Rwanda, where the World Economic Forum on Africa is currently in session.